So, we are in Luke 22, and we determined at the beginning of class that we're starting in verse 21. Give me 1 second. I'm running short of my technical support today. We just talked about, spent a lot of time with last week, the Last Supper and the words of institution, as they're sometimes called, the words about the bread and the cup being Jesus's body, and the blood of the new covenant in His blood, which is poured out for you. We're going to talk a little more Sunday about the new covenant, but I want to focus on what Jesus says there about how this blood is poured out for you, for especially in that moment, the people around that table. But he follows that immediately with something that almost sounds like it doesn't belong. It's poured out for you, but the hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine on the table. The Son of Man will go as it's been decreed, but woe to that man who betrays him. So all these words about Jesus giving himself to bring about this new covenant, it's almost anticlimactic that immediately we're talking about betrayal. We're immediately talking about the person who's going to betray him is there eating with it. I mean, it's just compounded, isn't it, by the fact that it's in such a amicable situation, friends, people who love each other, and yet there's still betrayal there. There's still the edge of betrayal. The food that that Jesus says is his body and it's his blood is also being shared by somebody who doesn't buy in wholeheartedly, right? Or who has other motives. And that's disappointing for us, probably, though I suppose that also sort of tracks with maybe our own experience, right? That just because there is a community of the new covenant, and just because people share in communion together, it doesn't mean there's not disappointment, and there's not failure, and there's not sin that still finds its way into the life of the church. It's been that way, I suppose, from the beginning. Verse 23, then they begin to question among themselves which of them it might be who would do this. But then also a dispute arises. So again, you've got betrayal followed by a dispute. And what's the dispute about? Who loves Jesus more? Who can serve him better? What's the dispute about?
Considered the greatest.
Who's the greatest, right? Who is considered to be the greatest? I don't know how you would rate the apostles. I don't know who is best, who is number one. Maybe Peter, right? John, James, we know, gave his life very early on. Most everybody, I think, knows who they rank last, right? But the disciples are having this debate in the middle of all this of the Passover feast, and Jesus reinterpreting some of the symbols from the Passover feast in this way. Right in the middle of it, you've got this debate about who's the greatest.
It's in the shadow of the cross.
Yeah, right.
It doesn't seem very appropriate.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's in the shadow of the cross.
They don't seem to see the seriousness of what's coming.
Right.
It's like blindsided them.
So how does Jesus respond? somebody want to read a little bit, read 25 through 27?
I will.
Go ahead,
I'll read. Mhm.
go ahead.
Jesus told them, in this world, the kings and great men lord it over their people, yet they are called friends of the people. But among you, it will be different. Those who are the greatest among you should take the lowest rank, and the leader should be like a servant. Who is more important, the one who sits at the table or the one who serves? The one who sits at the table, of course, but not here, for I am among you as one who serves.
So
That is,
that's how Jesus responds, right? With this thought about service. He talks about service. He talks about becoming the youngest or the lowest, becoming the least.
The
He's
word,
not-
the
Go ahead.
word for servant, is the Greek form for deacon. So you could say the one who deacons acts like a deacon.
Who
Here
eats.
it's to serve, to wait on the table. But
Yeah.
I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's diakonos, and it's
And the NIV has it consistent all three times. Three times he says that, uses that, the one who deacons, the one who deacons, the one who deacons, the one who serves, the one who serves, the one who serves. Three times. That's consistent. That's what it is in the Greek. That's all.
That's correct. And so he wants to talk about, they want to talk about rank, right? They want to talk about who's greatest. He wants to talk about service. I don't think we've come very far. Do you? I mean, I think in our world, there's still a lot about where you fall in the pecking order and where you sit in the polls and what your position is and what your authority is. And even in church, we can fall into that. And sometimes there's great abuses because of that. And Jesus just says, we're just not going to do that, right? We're just not going to have that view of the world where we rank people, where we evaluate people based on where they sit on some list. We're going to talk about service instead, because that's his example, right? I am among you as one who serves. If you want to be like me, if you want to follow me, if you want me to be your master, then service is going to be a huge part of it. And I think, we would do well, perhaps in some of our less thoughtful moments, to remember that to follow Jesus is to be about serving others and being willing to sort of be considered lower and less important in order to serve. Thoughts about service, thoughts about that.
This comes after, in the life of Christ, it comes after he washes everybody's feet. In the life of Christ, this comes after, but not in Luke. It's not recorded in Luke. That's recorded in John.
In John 13, instead of the stuff about the Lord's Supper, you have Jesus going around washing the feet of the disciples. He acts out this very thing, right? Peter says, "Oh no, you can't wash my feet. That's not the way the rankings work, right? That's not where we sit relative to each other." And Jesus, insists, if you want to have a part with me, then you gotta let me wash you. Service is very much what it means to follow Jesus. Serving is very much what it means to follow him. But of course, in verse 29, then, and I confer on you a kingdom, just as my Father conferred one on me, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So I think that's kind of interesting that he sort of, after he talks about service, he says, you will have authority, you will have power. I don't know what it means that the disciples are given this position, this rank, other than just what it sounds like, right? They're talking about who's greatest, and Jesus comes back with, you have been there with me, and you are going to be great in the kingdom, and you are going to have this position that you want so much, but not right now. Right now, it's about service. Right now, it's about you giving, and you becoming least, and you becoming great in that way.
Paul picks up that language sort of later on, judging the world,
He does.
and I'm pretty sure you don't know what that means either, so.
Yeah, he asked
you know.
rhetorically, talking about people who are Christians taking each other to court over some dispute or the other. And he says, you're going to judge angels. Don't you know you're going to judge angels? And yet you go before even a pagan judge because you can't figure it out between yourselves.
United Methodist Church is going through that right now.
Yeah. I mean,
Their denomination.
In the church, we struggle with this. We struggle with power, and we struggle with position, and we struggle with who will have influence and who won't, and that's something that we have to deal with. And I think maybe one of the things we can do here as we read this is sort of lift our gaze a little bit, recognize that that the authority that Jesus gives us, and the power and the glory that comes through him is far greater than anything we can manufacture for ourselves. So we might as well just be people who serve, who follow him in letting go of that need for position and power and serve. Paul also talks in Philippians 2 about Jesus emptying himself and taking on the form of a servant, right? And so that's our model, that's our example. And there's not anything that we can do for other people that is beneath us, that is less than we're worth. And that's I think something we can all aspire to be better servants.
I think at first glance, it kind of sounds like, don't try to have power now, be good servants, and then you're going to get power, how is it phrased? In my kingdom. But I'm not sure it's really as simple as that, because I have no idea what it means that they're going to sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. I mean, in the kingdom of God, do we need judges? I mean,
Right.
I don't, I'm not saying I understand this, but I have no clue what.
Yeah. No, me either, and nobody does.
So it's
Judge
probably a
might-
moot point.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
It seems like it's kind of it's not a be patient now, you'll get your position later to me. I think I appreciate your sacrifice now, and it's a good thing later. Not necessarily that you're going to be better than the next guy later, although I don't know, maybe it does.
Judge, and judge can mean, think of the Old Testament meaning of judge very often, the person who's in leadership, a person who leads, a person who's in authority in some way.
To deliver.
A court setting. So maybe that's what we have in mind here.
But why is that needed in heaven? I mean, or in the kingdom of
I don't
God?
know the answer to that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the answer to that, except that I know that Jesus, in response to their wrangling about power, says, I think he says essentially that you'll have what you want. Don't worry. You'll be fine. You're gonna sit on 12 thrones. He doesn't say, by the way, whose throne is nicer, right? or whose throne is lifted up higher, which of the 12 is gonna be in charge of, he doesn't say that. He just says, he kind of puts them all at equal status, on an equal place, and says it's, that's all for things to worry about, or not to worry about, but things to look forward to in the glory to come. Eating at my table, don't overlook that too, right? That he, you know, that he welcomes them to eat at his table in the kingdom. They're eating at a table now, but they're going to be at a banquet together in the kingdom that is even greater.
Or maybe this is just sort of like when Jesus, was tested by the woman who had multiple husbands, and who will she be married to in heaven? And the response was basically, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, right.
And here maybe the response is, we're not supposed to understand, but he's trying to make a point. You're arguing about who's going to be greater. You don't know what you're talking about. So just stop arguing, because you have no clue. You're completely out of your depth here, and see, I'm going to throw this out, and you don't understand it, and nobody else understands it, and that shows you don't know what you're talking about. So just bring it to a halt.
And we don't know how many. I mean, it says you stood beside me in my trials. Well, they didn't do a great job in the most important trials. So did they lose? I mean, you know, I'm not bringing it up to be nitpicky. I'm just saying it's a really puzzling, and we don't know that there are only 12 people judging. It might be everyone there is judging, and you know, I mean, I don't know.
I do like that line about you stood by me in my trials. And as you say, Christy, not real well sometimes, but he seems to appreciate that, right? He seems to give them credit for their attempts and trying. And I'm thankful for that I maybe get credit for showing up sometimes, and for, you know, giving it giving it the best I can do in the moment. And he seems appreciative of their willingness to be with him, even when they don't get it, right? And even when they don't understand. I'm thinking of, this is in John, but Thomas, you know, doubting Thomas, right? The one we all think of as doubting Thomas. Thomas was also the one who, when Jesus said, I'm going to Jerusalem near the end of his life, Thomas said, well, come on, I guess we might as well go die with him. You know, he didn't get it, you know, but that's loyalty, right? I don't know what we're doing, and this seems stupid to me, but you know, if he's going to go to Jerusalem and get himself killed, I guess we will too. And you know, so I liked it.
I mean, they're judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Later, Paul says the saints will judge the world.
Yes. Yes.
And in that context, if we endure, we shall reign with him.
Yeah, yeah. And I think maybe that's the sort of the takeaway from this, that glory is to come, right? That's for when the kingdom is fulfilled. We don't worry about glory until then. We don't spend much time thinking about it. We're servants, and we follow the one who left all that glory, right? and came and emptied himself to be a servant. We follow him, and we trust that as he is resurrected and exalted, so will we be resurrected and exalted. I like too that, you know, Ron, you're pointing out that you know, they don't get it, they don't understand what they're talking about. In verse 31, then Jesus turns around to Simon, to Peter, and says, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat, but I've prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. I find that comforting too, right? Jesus sort of preemptively reinstates him. You know, you're going to struggle, and you're going to fail miserably, but when you have turned back, so it seems like he's envisioning already Peter's response to his failures, which will be to turn back and to then be a strength to those other followers of Jesus. I think sometimes our failures can give us opportunities to really learn how to strengthen others who struggle. When we struggle, I think sometimes we can learn how to then be of encouragement to others when they fall. But he replied, of course, Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death. I mean, that's an admirable sentiment, right? But it's one of those things that is easy to say and harder to do. And Jesus says, I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows today, you'll deny me. You'll deny 3 times that you know me. So there's this, it's coming, right? This thing that's hanging over all of them is coming, and Jesus knows it. And I you know, you talk sometimes about the distance between what God knows and what he could prevent and what, and it just comes down, doesn't it, to sometimes people are going to make the choices they're going to make, and that's where we are with Peter. He's going to deny Jesus, and Jesus knows that. Then Jesus asked him, when I sent you without purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything? Nothing, they answered. When was that, by the way?
He said about 2 by 2.
Yeah, back in chapter 9, 10, right? He sent him out.
Galilean, early Galilean ministry. something
Yeah,
like
he
that.
sent them out throughout Galilee, throughout the towns, and he sent them without like anything, any fallback plan, right? He sent them out in faith, stay where you're accepted and welcomed, and stay there and eat the food that they give you, and don't bounce around, and if you're not accepted, then just go on to the next town, and don't take all this stuff with you. Don't depend on. So we talked about that. So he says to them in verse 36, but now if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag, and if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. This is a really interesting passage here, isn't it? Normally, what do we think Jesus thinks about swords?
Not needed, not necessary.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to tell Peter in just a minute, put your sword away. So what's going on here? Why does he tell them they need to have their purse and their bag and sell their cloak and buy a sword? What's going on here?
Well, I should point out that this is confusing enough that even the syntax is confusing
Yes, it
here.
is.
So exactly figuring this one out when you're not even exactly sure what how the words are supposed to relate to each other is, well, okay, let's give it a shot. But it's a very confusing bit of the scripture.
It is. It's very good. It's one of the most difficult passages in Luke, honestly, for a lot of reasons.
Well, a sword is always for self-defense, and
Yeah, usually
that's why he's telling you, there's gonna be times when you're gonna have to defend yourself legitimately. There's a time, and place to protect yourself and your family, your brothers and sisters. And I think he's preparing them for that. Now,
maybe
that's just one theory.
maybe.
Well-
Though, what happened to turn the other cheek?
Well, that's part of it. There's times you keep your sword in the sheath and then you turn the other cheek. There's other times when you defend yourself. Somebody breaks in your house, gonna kill your family, you better have some way to defend them.
I would
He says
just
take
point
a
out-
sword.
What?
He says take a sword. He didn't say use a sword.
This is buy one, right? He didn't say use it. Verse 37 is interesting. It's written, and he was numbered with the transgressors. And I tell you that this must be fulfilled in me. Yes, what is written about me is reaching its fulfillment. There are a lot of people who would argue that what Jesus means here is by having some swords, we fit the definition of the transgressors. We fit the definition of we're the outlaws, we're the brigands, and so I can be numbered with the transgressors. I don't know that I buy that. I struggle with that a little bit. but it's probably as good an explanation as any as to what he means. To fulfill this scripture from Isaiah 53 about being numbered with the transgressors, go get some swords. Again, it doesn't explain everything to me, and I'm not sure I'm still there. And it's interesting, then the disciples said, "See, Lord, here are 2 swords." And Jesus says in response, "That's enough." Now, what does he mean? All right, enough talking about swords. Does he mean 2 swords is enough for whatever we're going to do? By the way, if 2 swords is enough, he's not envisioning the disciples putting up a big fight, is he? This isn't a knockdown, drag out battle that we're
It's like
talking
if they're
about.
going down the road and somebody wants to hold them up or something.
Well, but
They need somebody to stand up to them, with a sword or 2.
but in
Instead
the
of- I don't know.
in the story, swords are used. So, I mean, just narratively speaking, I mean, this does tie in. I mean, we're not exactly sure what the purpose was and everything, but Jesus talks about swords, and lo and behold, about 10, 15 verses later, swords are used. And by the way, they're used offensively in many respects, and an ear gets lost.
And
Right.
Jesus says,
But just
"Enough
sort
of
of,
this."
yeah,
And you're good.
Stop it, and he heals it. It's Chekhov's sword, is what you're saying, right? It's like Chekhov's gun. It's if it's mentioned, it's going to be used. Is that it?
Well, otherwise they're just going to appear out of nowhere.
Right.
And, so I mean, just in terms of narrative criticism here, it
This
makes
is how we got
sense.
the swords, right?
Well, and apparently there was some intentionality to have the swords as well. So, I don't know what it means, but it's part of Luke's envisioning, and it was part apparently of Jesus's thinking of how this was going to play out. And
It
Um,
seems
go
to
ahead.
me the point is comparing it to the prior. He makes a point of comparing it to the prior instructions.
Yes.
We're focusing on the sword, but it's almost like, okay, that was our first taste of it in some ways. This is different. This is long term. Prepare to be hated. Prepare for animosity. Prepare that you're going to have to feed yourself. You're going to have to.
Yeah.
It seems to me like it's okay, folks. I'm leaving. This is the long picture. Don't think it's the same as what you just did recently.
Yeah, because the
And
person
whether that means literally use a sword or not, or is it just part of the description of what is to come, or you might be meeting somebody else's sword, kind of thing. To me, that's otherwise, why bring up the first part?
Yeah, the person and bag are there too. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
that's why I was thinking as well that he's speaking because he has the bird's eye view, so to speak, and he knows his time is coming. So he's preparing these very humanistic men, and this bringing about some sort of security for them, even though we know it's hollow, but they're still human, and they're going to still need money and purses and swords, etc. And so I think it's just preparing them for the next step of him not being with them, and maybe more on an offensive side than a defensive side, but be prepared, because it does bring us security, humanistically speaking, when we have the things we need to deal with the mob or or pay a bill or whatever the case is. It brings about a bit of security, and we are human, and these guys were human.
I think he's trying to tell them, you're gonna be taking care of yourself for a while, guys.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
maybe so. I just think it's interesting then in verse 49, after the betrayal, Lord, should we strike with our swords? They're not on the same page yet, right?
No.
They're still. So, is this when we use the sword? Now, the other kind of getting all excited. Is this when we use the sword to fight off these guys who want to arrest you? He says, that's enough. That's enough of that, and heals the man who's been wounded. I mean, there's a pretty blatant statement there about what he thinks about exercising violence on his behalf, and so I think that's interesting.
Well, he didn't say get rid of the swords. He just said put it away.
Put it away.
So, this is not the time to use it.
So verse 39 then, Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down and prayed. I just think it's interesting, just in passing, this was apparently something Jesus did a lot when he was in Jerusalem, right? This was a favorite place, perhaps, a favorite place to pray, a favorite place where maybe they spent some nights together praying and camping. So anyway, he goes as usual to his place, and on reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him, and being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. I just would point out a couple of things. The praying that they won't fall into temptation.
Sermon on the
That's
Mount.
an interesting. I'm sorry. What?
Sermon on the Mount,
Yeah. Yes.
the Lord's Prayer.
That's an interesting thing too. That pray to strengthen yourself against temptation. I don't know. Do we do that as we should? Do we obey Jesus in that? Are we more often praying for forgiveness for falling into temptation than we are praying to not fall into temptation at all?
Probably.
And I think that brings up some really interesting questions about our prayer time and how we spend our time in prayer and how much we spend and worth remembering, right?
And I think the implication with that, at least for me, is to be aware of what tempts me.
Yeah.
That prayer is not just, me not, and I hope, I wish, but being aware of my weak spots, the areas that I would be tempted in, if that's overspending and shopping and being at TJ Maxx 24/7 or whatever it is. That's lightheartedly said, but just being aware of the areas that tempt us, so we don't fall into temptation and do the things that are not pleasing to God.
And maybe even more vital is praying about the things that we don't see coming.
Absolutely.
I
think
don't
that's
think I
more
really see
than
this coming
being
exactly.
aware. Yeah, absolutely.
And so, maybe I think you're right. Pray about the things that we know we're tempted in, but also, there may be some things we don't see coming down the road, and just to pray that we don't fall into temptation is important. By the way, Jesus essentially does that. His prayer is essentially, doing the thing he's told his disciples to do. "Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Right? I mean, he's praying that please take this away, but if not, then let me do your will. Let me do what you want me to do instead of what I would.
Maybe it's because they might be tempted to deny him,
Yeah.
run away when times get really tough, and they they back out or run away or something.
He's already warned Peter, hasn't he? You're going to deny me 3 times. So,
Yeah.
so get out there, get out here and pray, and let's see if we can change this. Let's see if the Lord will change this.
This is part of what we don't understand. Like, he knows exactly what's going to happen, and yet there's the possibility that God can change his mind.
Yeah.
Like, how can both those things exist at once? This whole passage is full of things like that we don't fully understand.
I think the writer of Hebrews talks about how Jesus learned obedience from what he suffered. And this is kind of where you see this, that he had to learn what it is to bring the flesh into line with what God wants. Sometimes that doesn't come easily, and sometimes it requires a lot of work, and that's the kind of work Jesus did. You know, if you're willing to take this cup, if not, then we'll do what you want. I like that we have an example of Jesus praying this way, because I don't know about you, but there are things that it seems like God is doing sometimes that I'm not on board with exactly, and I'd sure like to see it go a different way. And I'm glad to know we can pray that prayer that you know, that I'd sure like this to go a different way, God, that we don't just have to resign ourselves to, well, you know, whatever the cold impersonal universe wants, you know, then that's the way it'll be. We can voice our struggles and our fears and our anxieties over what's coming, and Jesus does that, and yet also says, but I'm going to trust you enough to do what you want in all things.
I have always assumed, maybe incorrectly, that Jesus could have chosen not to die. Now, I don't know that we understand the complete relation. I mean, I know we don't understand the complete relationship there, but I think, can this cup be taken from me, is that tug of war between what I want as a man and could do perhaps because I'm because I'm God's son, and what I know I must do because I love these people here.
Yeah.
I don't get it, but it's so much more meaningful to me that there was this struggle. Like, if it was easy, then it wouldn't be as wonderful in my mind, I think. I don't know.
I think when Jesus says to the disciples to pray so they're not tempted, it's because he's doing the same thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's true. I think there was the very real possibility that he could choose not to go through with this. And now, you know, what would have happened? You know, would God have forced him to? I don't think so. I think part of it has to be, right, that he chooses to do this. In John, a lot is made about Jesus saying, I lay down my life. Nobody takes it from me. I choose to do this. And I think a lot of the point of his sacrifice is that it is a sacrifice that he chooses. He decides to do this. And in some ways has to, because if we assume the theology is correct, that in his choosing to do the will of God is the power to forgive those of us when we choose not to do the will of God, right? His choosing it is part of the power of the sacrifice. And so yeah, I think you're right. It is meaningful to me that we have this glimpse into his humanity as he struggles with this.
Yeah, I don't want to at all compare something that just happened to me with Christ's situation, but I'm going to, because it just sort of occurred to me. So as you heard, some of you heard that I ended up being admitted to the hospital again this weekend. And as I was in the ER, I was worried that they were going to have to put in a nasogastric tube, which I had before. And I absolutely, I mean, it is intolerable. I mean, the going in is terrible. And even then having it in, and you have to have it in for, more than a day or two. It could be longer than that. And it is every moment. It is. And so when the doctors came in and I thought everything was actually fine and they said there was a problem and we're going to have to put the tube in, what did I do? I said, is there any way we could not put in this tube? But I knew that that's what was probably going to have to happen. And then I let them put in the tube. I mean, I think that's just human. And
Sure.
I think that's what Jesus's situation was here. He knows what the plan is, but that doesn't stop him from being human. It also, though, emphasizes that what he was about to do was something he did not want to do. I mean, he knew it was going, it's not just Jesus breathing. I know there's the passage coming up about the angel, but even there, he's in anguish. And this wasn't easy. God was going to have to be hurt, seriously hurt. And that's what makes the sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right? If it didn't mean anything, if it didn't cause this kind of thing, well, what kind of real sacrifice was it? So, and in contrast with Jesus succeeding, we're going to see, and we've already started to see, the humans around him are failing constantly. And that doesn't mean that they're not redeemed. Right? So we've got this great contrast going on, but I think this emphasizes to us that Jesus did suffer. And when he died, it was not something I didn't want to nasal. I hated it every minute it was in there. It was awful. And Jesus's situation was, of course, much, much worse. And having to experience this. Right. So it's all building the picture that we're supposed to take away from this.
And you know, the suffering too, right, is something that when we go through suffering, one of the things as Christians we can do is look to Christ, who suffered, right, who went through these things, who prayed, and God did not give him what he wanted. Just like often is the case with us, as was the case with you this weekend, Ron, that God, you know, that sometimes God does not give us what we really, really want. And it creates anguish, right? It creates this pain. And Jesus has been through that. Jesus has struggled with that. He's felt that. He's been tempted as we are, yet without sin, the writer of Hebrews says. And that's why we can come to him and find strength and grace in our time of need. And so, you know, I think this prayer that he prayed is a good one for us. You know, please take this away. You know, I'll do your will, but please let's take this away. And even in the middle of the anguish, as you pointed out, Ron, in the middle of that anguish, in the middle of that disappointment, there's strength that comes to him. He's strengthened. He's not made to feel better. He's not made to. He doesn't get to give it a miss, but he's strengthened in it. And I think we'll find if we can respond like this to the struggles that we go through, we'll find strength as well.
Patrick,
yes.
Do you suppose by Jesus being human that he was scared?
Yeah, I would think so. I would think afraid. I would think, you know, he doesn't want to go through the pain. No human being in their right mind. That's not true, but generally speaking, human beings don't want to die. We want to survive. We want to get through whatever we're going through. We don't want our lives to end. And I think in all of this, Jesus is struggling with all the emotions that you and I would be struggling with.
Okay,
They could have chosen differently. He says when he's arrested, I can call down 12
Yeah.
legions of angels and get out of this. And to me, that's what makes the sacrifice even more meaningful. It was a decision every minute of every day. He knew it was going to end on a cross at age 33 or whatever his age was, and he bore that burden of that knowledge throughout his ministry.
That also explains why two swords are enough.
Go to Jerusalem and so on.
What's that, Ron?
It also explains why two swords are enough.
Yeah,
You
right.
got some legions of angels on call. You don't need to worry too much about your armaments in the garden.
If I need swords, I got them, right?
Yeah.
I think it's so sweet that God sent the angel to comfort him.
Yeah.
God didn't want to do to him what he knew he was going to have to go through. He was his son. Same way with us and with our children. But so we do what we can to comfort them. And God knew he was going to have to go through that, but he sent the angel to help him.
And I think there is also strength for us in those times. God will also give us that same kind of strength.
2 weeks ago, we talked about, I and Patrick talked about the cup. I brought up, like, Patrick, we're coming up to the cup. Well, some people believe that Jesus is talking about the cup of wrath. Okay. That he's eventually, God's going to abandon him on the cross. That Jesus will receive the wrath, which was supposed to be for us. He's going to receive the wrath, and that's what Jesus is talking about. And I told Patrick a story. I was like, well, I was talking this over with a friend of mine, and I explained to a friend of mine, I'm like, James and John, Jesus says that to James and John, you're gonna drink the same cup that I'm going to. So, so the idea is the cup is the cup of suffering. It's not, a cup of wrath. Elsewhere, it is a cup of wrath, but it's a cup of suffering, because I brought to, explain this to a friend of mine, and he's like, no, you're wrong. It's a cup of wrath. I said, how can it be a cup of wrath if James and John participate in it? He wouldn't answer that question. I said, it's right there. I mean, or you're talking about two cups. There's no two cups. There's one cup.
Yeah.
Said,
I think the most natural way to read it is, you're right. I think the most natural way to read it is this cup.
I'm not trying to
cup
diminish the
is
cup.
suffering.
I think, I'm trying, it is suffering, and, we will participate in the sufferings of Christ too.
Well, the thing that hits me, I've been going back and forth with, he was without sin. And that notion by itself, that I don't think he ever doubted that he would obey and do it. It doesn't eliminate suffering and pain and all that he didn't want to do it. But because he was without sin and he knew his purpose, he was gonna, and I think Chrissy asked a question, could he have said yes? Or no, I'm sorry, no. And I just think that was never an option for him, an option in him saying it. Yes, it was an option, but him saying it. For us, how many times do I say no? And that's where the grace comes in, because I'm not without sin. And so I see that as he modeled for me how when I do say no and when I am struggling, that once I commit to it, that God is there with an angel to carry me, to help me through it. And so the model is him modeling it is beautiful, but I just don't see him contemplating saying no when he knew that was his perfect purpose and was
The only thing I'd say is I don't know for a fact that for Jesus to say no in this situation would have been a sin. That's pure speculation on my part.
And see
but he's choosing to take our sins on himself, right? This is a choice. It's like, like I'm doing a favor for my son. That's if I choose not to do it, he can't hold me accountable for that, right? I chose not to do it. So I don't know. I agree. I know what you're saying, but if saying no in this situation wouldn't have been a sin, I gotta think there was a moment where he might have considered, I'm not gonna do this. You know, I think that was I think it was a real temptation, is what I'm saying, I guess, a real.
That's what I'm making the point, that our temptations don't necessarily change our mind.
God would change it.
Think about the temptations we have that are hard. And if I'm committed to it, I'm gonna carry it through. I'm not saying he wasn't tempted and didn't cross his mind. I just think in his perfection and having to be the sacrificial lamb,
What she says.
I don't think for me to be saved, that needed to happen. Now, I think, like you're saying, if he had said, no, I'm not gonna do it, just like us, I think grace is sufficient. But then that would not have made him perfect. That's how it plays out in my mind. He would have been so much like me then. But grace is sufficient. And I think God would have figured another way out to put another lamb on the altar. So
I think whatever we decide about that, we gotta make sure we don't take away from the humanity of Jesus. You know, that this was, you know, this is a glimpse into that struggle between flesh and spirit, and doing what God wants and doing what I want.
every time we suffer, is the answer no or yes?
I'm sorry, what now?
I guess what I'm saying is I don't think it takes away the suffering, because suffering doesn't dictate an answer either way.
Yeah.
It doesn't harm it, neither does it deny it. It depends on where the person's at. And so at least I'm not taking away his humanity or thinking that we take away his humanity. I'm just seeing him as perfect, and he can go through it in a different way than I can.
I think we're getting a little bit into, and I get it, into possibilities here. You know, could Jesus have said no? Well, in theory, yes. But just like with my NG tube, and the doctor's advice, in practice, there was no way his relationship with the Father, and more importantly, as Christians have recognized over the centuries, his and the Father's love for us, those were so compelling that although he wanted to express himself because he's human and he's going to give it one last shot, there was no way he was going to say no, because of his relationship with the Father and his love for us. So, I mean, do you want to say, could he? And he had the right to, but it would have, he couldn't have. I mean, he was in it, but he was in it because of his relationship with the Father and his love for us, and not because he really wanted to go through this. He just wanted the result, and he wanted that bad enough that he was willing to get through.
I think if he was tempted the way that we are, there was a part of him that wanted to do the wrong thing all the time. It chose not to. He overcame it, but there's always the possibility that we're going to cave in.
Yeah.
So if he was tempted the same way, that means there was a possibility for him to do the same thing, and that he wanted to give in to some extent, but chose not to.
I can't get away from, if there was really no way he was gonna say no, then isn't the prayer a formality at best? I mean, isn't it just, you know, him?
The emotional reaction makes no sense if he didn't really want
I don't know. I don't know. And we're not told, and I think we can certainly have different viewpoints on that.
But think about our humanity. There's things I know. I was just saying this to a client the other day. There's certain things I know I'm not going to do because of my values and who I am. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to be tempted. And I pray God help me to be able to do this. I don't want to do this, but I carry. We talked about this at different times, Patrick. But I can carry both glasses at the same time: the temptation and trying to do what's right. And so I think he suffered as much as anybody. Well, what does he say? Drops of blood. He was really anguished about this. But I think in his heart, like somewhat what Ron is saying, if he's the perfect sacrificial lamb, I think he knew he was gonna get through it. And I don't know, that's just where I stand with it.
We're trying to figure out how it is that someone could be God and a man.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
I mean,
but-
that's what we're doing, and we're not going to answer that question. So, I'm not saying it's not worth it. I mean, I was the one that brought up some of this stuff. I'm just saying it's, you know, there are people that would hear what's been said and say, well, then is it? I mean, it's a lot easier for Jesus if he knew that
Yeah.
it was definitely happening. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to, Patrick.
Kind of, yeah.
And then the other part is, but if we really entertain the idea that Jesus might not have done this, well, then we're saying there was a potential problem with an incomplete love, which we're not willing to entertain. And I just come back to that's part of the amazing part of the story, right? The God and the man in one. But
the prayer itself illustrates that God's will was going to be the deciding factor from Jesus's standpoint. He doesn't, he says, I have a right. He doesn't say, I have a right to do this. In his view, what he is has to be always in accordance with what the Father wants. That's going to be his priority. And so even at this point, he asks, he doesn't say, I have this right. It's if you're willing. That's going to be the number one thing. And, you know, again, I think that doesn't take away from the fact that he would have preferred not to do this. When it came to it, he was apprehensive about this. And he had every reason to be.
To say the least, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we gotta wind it up. So let me just land on verse 46. When he goes back to his disciples and finds them doing what?
Sleeping.
Another
While he is
failure.
praying his guts out in anguish. They are snoozing off to the side. And he says, get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. And I think that's a good place to leave it for ourselves. That let's don't be asleep, but let's be prayerful people that we will not fall into temptation, that we will be in line with the will of God in our lives as much as we possibly can.
And that even though they did fall into temptation, that didn't stop Jesus from continuing to hang out with them for the next, you know.
That's right. That's exactly right. All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks for your thoughts and your good comments.
Good
We
night.
will,
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Be careful out there tomorrow.
Yeah.